everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rabbi's Daughter podcast. I'm Shira, the daughter, and my dad is here with me.
Hello, Shira. Hello, everybody.
Hello. So today we're going to speak about secularization, the encounter between Haredi people and secular people, work, school, which happens more and more now. We all know there are people that become secular today, and I guess the numbers are higher than before. And it's something that requires attention from the rabbi. And maybe I'll also have something to say about it. So my first question would be, what is secularization? Like, how would you define it? What is this process?
Thank you, Shira. That's a nice question. It's not as easy to define the idea of secularization as we might think, because it's true. Often we think about from boys and girls, men and women, who stop keeping mitzvot. Okay, from the Jewish perspective, being observant, is somebody who's doing all these mitzvot. He's davening 3 times a day, keeping Shabbat, making sure you're eating kosher food on whichever level you're observing, and so on. And when you stop doing all those things, then you've encountered or you've become secular. Sometimes people use the expression OTD, off the derech, meaning you've gone from being observant, being Haredi, to being a secular person. But historically, if we think about the process of secularization that happened, let's say in the West generally, then it's not just about the observance, what you do and what you don't do, but it's also about authority. And I think that in the Haredi space, that's a very interesting insight. Meaning, secularization began with a question of authority. Do the rabbis have the ultimate authority? Do we do what the rabbis say? Or do we do what we say? Are we autonomous? Meaning we do what we feel is the right thing to do. And we could be very religious people. However, we do what we think is right.
Why would you call it secular, though?
Well, it's secularization because it secularizes the space. Even though I remain a very religious person, but the public space becomes a public space in which people make their own decisions. It's not controlled by rabbinic decision. It's not controlled by others, but rather we define. And I think that in the Haredi space, because of the strength of the idea of what we call das Torah meaning rabbinic authority, sometimes the step which is a very significant step in a Haredi person's life is whether or not you are beholden, whether or not you are entirely compliant with what the rabbis say, or do you now make up your own mind in terms of what's right for you, in terms of what's right for your children, in terms of educational institutions. It's just an interesting point.
Yeah.
Because a person could still remain very religious, but from a Haredi perspective, I just remember this often comes up before elections, okay?
Yeah,
before elections.
Like listening to the rabbis.
Yes. Before elections, there's always this tremendous push of if you're a Haredi person, what defines you? I
remember last time they said that if you don't vote, I don't remember what it was, I guess Gimel, but I don't know. If you don't vote this, then your Haredi identity card is taken from you.
Right, you lose your Haredi identity.
Yeah.
There was a significant rabbi, he said, listen, Charedim don't have a right wing, left wing. Charedim don't think about these things because it makes no difference. Charedim do what the rabbis say. And so from a Haredi perspective, I think that's often again, it's delicate to use the term secularization because you can still be a very religious person.
Yeah.
But you're already in your own space. Once you're in your own space, with your own discretion, making your own decisions, that's a very different kind of lifestyle, options, everything from the Haredi guy who is in the space of being compliant, obedient, doing whatever the rabbis say. It makes a big difference. And I think that you spoke about the encounter between the Haredi individual and the non-Haredi space. That is often one of the first significant challenges mentally of that encounter. A person gets to academic studies. Could be he's got permission from his rabbis to be in academia. Or a person gets to wherever he might get to, school, workforce, academia, the army. One of the big differences won't be, do you keep Shabbat or not? That's an important question. But one of the deeper questions will be the question of authority. The question of, do I tell, how do you define autonomy? There was somebody called Joseph Raz. He died recently, an Israeli scholar, lived in America most of his life. He defined autonomy as the right of people to tell themselves their own life story. They tell their own life story. It's just a sweet definition of autonomy.
Yeah.
So am I telling myself my life story, or is my life story a community story, a story that's defined by well, it is a community story to some degree, but is it defined by rabbinic decree? And often the encounter with the non-Haredi space, with the secular space, that will be one of the first issues.
But it's interesting what you're saying, because then I see it as a positive thing, a very positive thing, to be able to think for myself and to make my own decisions. And like, I feel bad saying it, but also if like some big rabbi says something, I can say that I don't agree. It's like, it's okay. I'm not going to die for it. I hope. We'll see.
Well, first of all, there'll probably be some other big rabbi who agrees with what you're saying. So generally, you'll be in safe space.
That's also a point, because like if we talk about secularization before Second World War, it was very black and white. Like, either you're part of the community and you listen to like the rules, you do as we say, and this is your like the rabbis and the parents and everything, or you're just not part of was like almost part of the Jewish people. You go to some university, you can't really be part of the community anymore. It doesn't exist. And I think, well, that was their way to try to keep the tradition and like the religion.
Well, it was a time of turmoil. It was a time of tremendous
so that was the way they tried to keep it.
Trauma. You know, we're talking about huge percentages of the Jewish people who ceased to be observant, ceased to follow the traditional conception of what it means to be Jewish.
And do you think the reason for that might be the fact that it was so black and white? So like, either you're here or you're not at all.
Well, it was part of it, I would imagine. What one has to also understand that the process of secularization before World War II in the 19th century and early 20th century wasn't just a Jewish phenomenon. It was just a worldwide, or at very least it was a religion-wide phenomenon. You know, the West, the encounter of tradition with modernity, which is illustrated so well by, for example, you know, Shalom Aleichem, Tovi the Milkman, or Fiddler on the Roof, that happens to be set in a Jewish setting, but it's a universal story. And all cultures, basically, will be able to identify with that. It was just a period of time that the world went through a trend of a downward spiral with respect to religious observance. Certainly that was true for the Jewish people. I guess though, like for
Christians, you don't have to leave the community or the family because it's different.
Well, it's different, but, you know, it's more defined as whether you're a churchgoer, not a churchgoer. Each religion will define it in a different way. It's true that it's hard to compare, because to be a religious Jew, that requires a great deal of commitment.
Yeah.
While to be a religious Christian, it's less commitment, and that's why the comparisons are not always, you know, commensurable, always comparable. But yes, it was more binary because of the traumatic element. It was just so traumatic for the religious communities that they erected these fences, built these walls. Anybody who leaves the walls is on the other side.
Yeah.
In Israel, of course, you know, there's also an attempt to keep those walls up. But because the community, the Haredi community, has become so large, and because of the needs of such a huge community, and also because of internet, let's say. So those walls have just become more permeable, more absorptive, and also less binary. And you can be in academia. But going back to what you said before, you think that's a great thing. You don't have to live your life based on what the rabbis say.
I think there are limits, and
right. The question
I should follow something.
Well, the question is always striking the balance, because like many things, secularism is very much a product of individualism. Being an individual. That's why the first thing is the authority question. When I'm an individual, what was the slogan in Germany? Be a Jew in your home and a person, a human being outside of your home. Meaning it's like a kind of...
Who said it?
This was the I don't remember, but it was the slogan of the emancipation in Germany. And that slogan is a very kind of Protestant slogan. It's a privatization of religion. In Catholicism, religion is the papal authority and the authority of the ministers and the bishops and so on. And in Protestantism, well, each person gets to read the Bible by himself. There's nobody else needs to oversee your connection with God. You have your own connection with God. And of course, in Judaism, in the Jewish communities, on the one hand, yes, we all study our own Torah and we do make decisions for ourselves. At the same time, we do travel along the course of Jewish history as a nation, as a community. We don't have our own halakha. Halakha is something which is universal. It's for the community. It's for the Jews together. And that's why it's a delicate question. And I agree. I think sometimes in certain Haredi spaces, it's taken too far. And of course, we need to have
the boundaries.
Yeah. But it's a place where you begin. And the trouble is, for some people that hail
What's
from...
bad in it?
Well, I'll tell you, the trouble is for some Charedim is that once something falls, meaning once, even if it's a custom or even if it's a question of, let's say it's a question of even going to work. Today, thank God, it's become more legitimate to go to work. But, a couple of decades ago, even a guy that goes to work feels he's doing something wrong. He's going against the kind of community ideal or the community norms. And he goes to work. He's not like depressed about going to work. He feels, wow, it feels good to go to work. But so you know what? So the entire structure can be compromised. The entire structure can become weaker, including a lot of the religious elements. Think about wearing a hat and jacket for davening. It's a community norm, okay? But you start going to work, you start davening on the train on the way to work. You're not going to wear your hat and jacket. Once you stop wearing your hat and jacket, you feel, you know what, I'm less religious. And therefore it can also impact many other things about your religiosity, about your upkeep of Torah and mitzvahs. You stop davening with a minyan. Why? Because you're working and it's hard and you're busy. It's difficult. But then things can go on a kind of downhill slide. Yeah. It's easier when you're in the community doing the same thing as everybody else, following the rabbinic guidance. When you're outside of that structure, outside of that framing, things can be more challenging. I
really think that knowing the difference between what you really have to do, like actual mitzvot and halakha, and just norms, because sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. And let's say in schools, they don't really teach it. They don't like teaching it because norms are, I guess, very important.
Well, the social norms, like the cultural norms. Yes, because they strengthen the Haredi identity. And the schools, they want to emphasize that we're the Charedim. And that community identity sometimes becomes the main one. And then when you lose that, you can lose everything. That's deeply tragic.
Yeah.
I agree with you. And I've seen that too many times when people...
So if you know the difference, then you know that you're okay.
Right,
you're a good person.
You can be okay with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, even if you're not a part of, or not a full card carrying.
They wouldn't say that though, because they don't want this to happen. They don't want people to stop being Haredi. So they don't teach it. And then I guess it's harder. I don't know. I used to think that being part of a community, not just a community, but let's say a big community, like being part of either Charedim or the Tilomi is very important. Like you have to pick a side. But I guess past few years, I don't think so, like anymore.
Well, first of all, Shira, you don't have kids.
True.
When you have kids, you have to send them to a school. When you send them to a school, then you're going to be picking a side on some level. It's true that today there are schools that are more, you would call them kind of in the middle, but they're not quite in the middle. There's always going to be a side. And, that identity is an identity that it comes with a set of values. Those values...
What if you don't agree with all these values?
You know what? That's for when you're older. But as children, it's a package deal.
Yeah.
You're a part of that community that comes with values. And then if you're in a home that encourages individual thought and independent kind of thinking about these questions, then you can try to balance them out later and say which ones do you really embrace strongly and which ones are you not so religious about. But as children, it's a package deal. And therefore, you can say now, as a young adult, I'm comfortable in this space without the strong identity, and I can be a very religious person also. But
like with the values, I take the values and I appreciate them, and I keep mitzvot because I believe in it, and I do what I do because I really think it's right. But like when it comes to norms, then I make my own decision.
Well, in the Haredi world, there's a distrust of that approach, meaning people are weak and fallible, they can fail, and therefore we want people to keep mitzvot not just because they believe in them, but because they're a part of a community, and our community keeps them.
And I guess it's also good in a way.
It gives you a certain strength. That gives you a certain strength, because sometimes you get up in the morning and say, you know what, today I don't believe in it so much. And if you're part of a community that's waiting for you in the synagogue, in the shul, and says, do you show up or not? And if you don't show up, then, it'll be noted if you're a man. Then you understand what I mean, though.
Yeah.
Then that's a community strength, and I
think it's important to have some community strength, like you decide.
Good.
But like I can say about myself, if one day I wake up in the morning and I'm like, well, who says this is all true? Maybe there's no God. Maybe I don't know.
Right.
Well,
Your shock value here. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not gonna stop keeping everything.
Okay, good. Because why not?
I guess because that's the way I live, and I believe that this is the right way.
Well, no, but you just don't. Now you don't.
Well, but usually I do.
Well, because you're part of something bigger. Because this morning you woke up on the wrong side of bed, and you think maybe there's nothing there. But the reason why you'll keep doing it is because you're part of something bigger. A family tradition, a community tradition, a national tradition of the Jewish people, of your ancestors, a huge chain that you're a link in that chain. And then you say, you know what, I'm not going to throw that out just because this morning I woke up on the wrong side of bed. But that's because you grew up with this strong belonging. And the thing is, when you meet the secular space weakens that belonging. It strengthens the individual side of us, because that's what it is.
But then it
weakens that belonging.
It also gives us the ability to choose, like to do it, to be part of it.
You're right.
And without being individual, you're just there because this is where you are.
You're right. So you know what? Go into the secular space for long enough to feel that you're making a real choice, and then choose right. You know what I mean?
But you have to take the risk of people will choose wrong.
Yes, you're right.
Wrong. Different.
Right. And that's why in the Haredi vision, we grow up Haredi as part of the community, and that belonging is stronger almost than anything else, right? And yes, it's true. When you go into a non-Haredi space, and then you discover that there are values there too.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's fascinating,
it's hard.
But it's all right. It can also undermine some of those principles. That's why
it does. I felt this way.
Where?
So the first time I really remember feeling it was after high school. High school was like all Charedim. It wasn't.
But there was no deep encounter outside the Haredi space.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I always had a bit of an encounter also because of like we have secular family.
Right.
And neighbors and friends.
By the way, just to go on the record, I don't love the word secular because, for example, our family,
yeah, they're not really secular.
They don't keep mitzvot, but they daven.
Yeah, they believe.
One of your uncles, he doesn't keep mitzvot, but he puts on tefillin every day. There you go. We'll speak about this after, right? Meaning, the word secular is like it's sometimes a harsh word.
I was reminded you spoke in the beginning about the term of the derech.
Right.
And I hate this term.
Right.
Like derech. Like who decides what's the derech?
So you can go OTD. It can be on their derech.
On their
derech. Some other derech. Yes. Yeah. But go ahead. So what was your first significant encounter? Where was it?
I remember I started to volunteer in Shalva. That was 5 years ago, maybe.
4, maybe.
4. Yeah, 4. And it was the first time that I was like the only Haredi in the building, except for the special need kids. And it was very interesting, and we had conversations about army and about mitzvot and about Charedim, Datim, Leumim, how do you, the differences. And I remember feeling like, well, this is not a bad way. They're fine. They're doing the right things and they're okay. I guess they have different challenges, but you can deal with them in the house. Every society has challenges, and yeah, as parents, you have to deal with it. And it was kind of shocking. I remember it was like, wow, okay, so what do I do now? Why do I choose to live the way I choose?
Right. And the answer is because that's a family you're born into and
so on.
But those
I spoke to mommy about it.
I
spoke to mommy about it because I was really, it was hard for me. And she said, look, we're not Charedim because that's the only way to do the right thing. It just happens to be that we are Charedim, and that's a way that we can be good people and we can do the right thing. That's one of the ways, but it's a good way. And well, there are challenges in every way, but I was she said it's not such a big deal. You can choose this, you can choose that, you can stay with the same values.
Right. But which is not something you'll hear in your Haredi schools. And for a legitimate reason. You can understand that also. Yeah. One of the issues, or one of the big differences between the Haredi space and the religious Zionist space, not all of it, but at least a very, very large parts of it, is whether we live comfortably in a secular space or not. In the religious Zionist space, people live in an environment where a lot of your experiences, many of your friends, the institutions, the culture, the music, everything will be non-religious. And the Charedim are their strategy is a different strategy. Their strategy is, we want to live, that's why the Chazon Ish moved to Bnei Brak. Chazon Ish, fun fact, the Chazon Ish started his life in Israel, or in Palestine then, in Tel Aviv. And he made the decision to move to Bnei Brak, which wasn't a Haredi city, but it was a religious city. It was a religious Zionist city. And he said, I want to be in a place, and I want my community to be in a place where there's no Chilul Shabbat. There's no violation of Shabbat. And it wasn't a Haredi place, but he didn't want to be in Tel Aviv, where the community would be in a place where people drive on Shabbos. And that is the kind of Haredi mindset. And
well, Charedim say, I remember a teacher that said, most teachers said that it's worse to live next to the Datim Leumim than to live next to Chilonim, because the Datim Leumim, it's you look at them and they look okay, and then you might get really confused. But with Chilonim, it's that you're different, you already see it right away.
Wow. Shocking. So the Chazon Ish did not think like your teacher. The Chazon Ish said, no, we want to be in a religious place, even though it wasn't a Haredi place. And that really defines the kind of, you open the discussion, right? Secularization. In the Datilumi space, there's such a thing as a religious spectrum. In Hebrew, they call it Datiyim ala spectrum, right? Being religious on a spectrum of religiosity. And that's almost inevitable when you live in this broad Jewish space where you have a lot of non-religious people and religious, and then you have people in the middle who make their individual choices.
There's also like in the end of the spectrum there's the tlashim. How would you say the tlashim in English?
Right, the tlashim, which is like formally religious, but
it's
so
only
they're not secular,
religious
they're formally
Zionist
religious. Right.
It's not going to be for Charedim that stop being from, because it's not like, it's hard. When someone says that he used to be Haredi and now he's secular, or whatever you want to say instead of secular. So, there is a painful story there. But if someone says I'm at the clash, it's like, well, there are many.
Right, and when he says I'm formerly Haredi and now I'm not religious, you'll know he's really not religious. He's not going to send his kids to Haredi schools. All of the Datlashim, the formerly religious scientists, they'll send their kids to religious Zionist schools, not all of them.
Someone once told me, he was like this old guy, and he said he's a Datlash, and he said he wants to send his kids to from schools because he wants them to be Datlashim. He doesn't want them to be Chilonim.
Exactly. And the Charedim are afraid of that. They don't want to have the spectrum, and therefore they try to maintain a sterile space. The problem is, what happens when those Charedim who are brought up in a sterile place, what happens when they inevitably, and it happens to so many, end up in academia or in a workforce, in real significant encounters, or today in the army and so on. And then that encounter becomes very challenging because the educational system doesn't provide you with the tools to navigate those encounters. So for me, as somebody coming from London, growing up in a very open space, so going to Hebrew U wasn't like a big trauma, but for many of my Israeli Haredi friends, it actually was. It was it was not simple for them. I would say even for you, Shira,
it wasn't that hard.
Not that hard because your family is a more kind of broad family with broad experiences. Yeah,
you also really, like you and mommy, raised us to think about what we do. So having questions about the way I live or my values or beliefs, it's like something that is good. And it's the way to go deeper.
And then even when you encounter that, but for in the Israeli Haredi space, which is more rigid, it's much harder. All of these families, I think about it because I just came to this interview to this podcast episode. It's not an interview. I came from Netzach Yehuda. And we were speaking about our lone soldier division, which is hundreds of soldiers. And they're classified as lone soldiers because their families don't want them to be at home.
It's terrible.
So we can say it's terrible, and that's something we should speak about separately. But just for purposes of this conversation, the families are afraid. The families, because they're in this more like rigid, black and white, binary Haredi environment, to have a boy at home who's in the army, he's outside of the community boundaries, of the community norms. He's doing something which is not accepted in whichever community it is. That's something that threatens the integrity of the family, the status of the family in the community and so on. And therefore they don't know how to handle it.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. It's hard. I mean, it's also a conversation about what is the role of a family. But that's a different topic.
Well, it's different and it's connected. Is the role of the family to make sure you stay Haredi. Many families will say, our role
would say,
that to make sure that our kids grow up Haredi or grow up Vishnitz or grow up Belz. We're a Belzer family. Our duty or our responsibility is that our kids should also be Belz. Maybe that's a bit too harsh. But because maybe not just Belz can marry into Vishnitz. but the general idea is true. And like I said, that on the one hand gives a certain strength of community belonging. On the other hand, it gives a certain weakness when that encounter happens. But you know what the Charedim will say? The encounter is dangerous either way. If you're going to be living, or at least having significant experiences outside of the Haredi space, or in the non-religious space, wherever you're coming from, that's going to be dangerous.
I have this conversation with many people, and some of them say that when we look at the religious Zionist people, and we learn from them how dangerous it is. So that's where we know that we shouldn't go to the army, because we see them and we don't want to be like them, because they give up on values that they don't give up on it, but it's harder, I guess, statistically.
Right. So first of all, I think that's a fair point.
It's hard for me to hear it though, because I don't know. I think that if you believe that there's something that you should do, we can speak about the army. It's like the hottest issue. Like if you believe that you're supposed to go to the army and to help defend Israel, the Jewish people, then like it's your obligation to find a way to do it. And if you can do it, so you have to. So
it's. I was wondering how you'd complete the sentence. I mean, you said if you believe, there were two ways to go. If you believe that this is something you should do, then you should. So you finish the sentence. You should find a way to do it. The alternative way to finish the sentence was then you should do it, irrespective of what the consequences will be. It doesn't matter what the consequences will be. So that I'm happy you didn't go that way, because that then I was like, wait, okay, I was like, whoa.
No, of course you should think about this.
Right, and finding a way to do it is, I think, is clearly not easy.
But I see people that manage to do both.
Right, and we can also build. It's funny. The Charedim are often criticizing the religious Zionist space because it has a greater fallout rate, or greater rate
it's true.
of becoming less frum. It's not. The statistics are not entirely clear.
Oh, really?
Well, it's just because
they were.
Again,
it's hard to say.
It's difficult to say because somebody was just telling me about somebody that I know. You don't know him, but he's a chassid, a ger chassid, and I've been working with him for a few years. And somebody told me, he just dresses up like a ger chassid, but he's not frum at all. He doesn't keep any mitzvot. He's like way outside of the boundaries of religion.
And you think there are many people like this?
I don't know how many there are. I don't know. Again,
I want to say I've never met, but I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. But, and also, these are matters of the heart.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. But I'm going to assume, for purposes here, that yes, it's true. The statistics don't lie, or not completely. And there's certainly a greater fallout rate in the religious Zionist space. But it also allows us, from the Haredi place, to learn from that experience about what can work better.
But don't you think it's
about participating in Israel and taking those responsibilities, which do mean these encounters, but in a way where we'll be able to preserve the religious life better and stronger. There's decades of experience here, and don't forget, without the religious Zionists having done this, the army would still be a super secular place like it was in the 60s and 70s and 80s. It's only because there's so many Datim Leumiyim that went into the army that made the army into this
it's way
far
easier
more
to be
religious space that it is today.
I have a friend at work. I think I told you this before. I have a friend at work that said he's not going to send his kids to the army. And I was like, okay, why? He's secular, totally secular. You can say secular about him.
Okay.
And I asked him why, and he said, the army is like a frum place. It's religious. And I'm like, okay, wait, you don't want religious people to go to the army? And he's like, yeah, I want them to go to the army, but they have to stay like simple soldiers, nothing more. Because if they become, mafakdim ktinim,
commanders, officers.
Yeah, it changes the army. Yeah,
right, which is what's happened. So meaning, as it were, the Tilumiyah, the religious Zionists, they've laid the groundwork for the Charedim to be able to join in a way where the encounter will be much softer, and the whole kind of fear of becoming not Haredi or not religious is much less today than it was. We can learn from that experience and build the kind of infrastructures, but it's a change. It's a change in the ethos. It's a change in the way you think. And of course, it's difficult to undergo that change. It's a change in education because you have to educate for that encounter. The Charedim have it easy, or had it easy, because they didn't have to educate to that encounter. They would assume that encounter is not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
But
it does.
But it does. That the point is, it's happening anyway.
Yeah.
No, it's not because...
It's not just the army.
Exactly. The army is the last step of this. But in the general Haredi space, those encounters are happening the entire time. And whether it's, you know, in the most extreme settings, which is, let's say, in the army, but just think about workforce. When your average Haredi young woman is working, Racheli, my daughter-in-law, your sister-in-law, right, is now interviewing for a job, who knows where, at Apple, or potentially at Google. Somebody else told me, never mind. But, you know, and other places, and Amdocs and Mobileye.
I've never worked in a Haredi space.
Right.
For like 2 weeks I have in a newspaper. It was 2 weeks before I quit.
Well, for other reasons. But yes, I mean, you're also working in a non-Haredi space, and you're not exceptional in that, meaning those encounters are happening anyway. And therefore, the question isn't, do we want to allow those encounters? That would be a ridiculous question, because that's the reality.
Yeah.
The question is, how do we now educate, prepare our kids for those encounters to ensure that those encounters shouldn't come as a kind of shock that will destabilize their religious belonging, their religious world. And I think that's the real question.
It reminds me a bit of Moshe Koppel's book. What's it called in English? And
Judaism Straight Up.
Yeah, so he speaks about it, about being able to maintain Judaism, as he calls it, as a mother tongue language.
Mother tongue.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, he published an article on this.
I loved it.
Way before the book.
It was
Judaism
so
as a
good.
mother tongue.
And I really believe that it's a good way to maintain the values and to keep the mitzvot, but not to be so rigid about it. Not to be so afraid of what will happen if we encounter people that are different. Because if it's like a core thing inside of us, then, you know, it's easier.
I meet a lot of people. It's fascinating for me. I meet a lot of people who themselves are, you know, they work or their activities take them way outside the Haredi space. But they say, you know, for my kids though.
I hate this.
Really, they trust themselves, but they don't trust their kids. I can't
stand it. Like I once met this guy and he said the same thing. We spoke about the idea of what was it? Like, yeah, I don't know. We spoke about like where to live and stuff like that. And he was like, well, I want to live in like a Haredi space and to send all my kids to like very Haredi places because I'm afraid of what will happen to them if, you know, I won't. And when he's like, I mentioned the army, and he was like, well, look, I just don't trust. He didn't say I don't trust my kids, but he said, like, look, I just see what happens to people when they're not in the Haredi network. And I can see what happens in he mentioned the religious Zionism, that there's so many people that are secular and I don't know. And I was like, well, look at yourself. You're doing all these things. You're not part of the Haredi community.
50 or 25 houses?
He was like 30, maybe.
30.
Yeah. So like, you trust yourself, you're good. But you don't trust your kids to do the same thing, to make their decisions and to keep their values. And he was shocked. He was like, wow, I didn't think about it.
I mean, again, to play devil's advocate, you could say that, well, I'm 30 and they're 18. Well,
I guess they're not 18.
Right.
But
I'm just saying that there is, you know, there's room to maneuver here. It's not all black and white.
It's true. No, but he also went through different like systems stages, when he was a kid also.
Right. Yeah. So, you know,
I think once the values are are really strong and part of the house, then you have to trust the kids. I mean, what other option is there? Except for raising them in some bubble, which is going to explode anyway eventually.
Well, that's interesting, insight. In the Haredi space, there's a lot of distrust of kids, and it's not just distrust of kids; it's a distrust of the human condition generally. There's a kind of conservative insight there. Thomas Sowell.
It's like the Federalists.
Or the Federalist Papers, right? To have strong structures, because we don't trust people. People go wrong, and that's why we need strong structures. And the question is always finding the balance, because if the structure is too strong, then, like we said, any encounter can destabilize, and also people will rebel against it because it doesn't provide them with the individual self-expression.
To be able to change with, reality.
Right, and you start worshipping the structure instead of the content that the structure is supposed to serve.
The values.
Right, the values that the structure is supposed to serve. So yes, that's a problem. While at the same time, and in the Haredi space, there is a certain concept there that the child is born into the world. He starts his life in the Haredi preschool, and then in the Cheder system, in the elementary schools, and then in the Yeshiva Ketana, which is the Haredi high schools, and then in the Yeshiva Gdola, which is the post-high school institutions. And then he gets married, or same thing with a girl. She stayed, right, what's the idea of staying in? It used to be that the girls used to get married at 19 while they're still in the seminar, seminary.
I mean, many of them still do.
Your mother got married when she was still studying in the Haredi school. And that would be the ideal, meaning you're never outside of the institutional framework.
I broke this idea.
For family fever, but yes. But that was the kind of ideal. And then you get married and you have a couple of kids. And by the time you're kind of starting to think, 1 second, like, where's this going?
You have the framework already.
You're within, right? Your kids are already in the schools. Meaning you're always in the institutions. And like you said, you have to strike a balance. That maybe takes it too far because people will become disillusioned and they won't be ready for the encounter with the outside. And the rigidity will be,
Do you think in order to maintain this balance as a society, you need to have people that are more rigid, people that are more like following everything the rabbi says, or you can have a society where everyone is like more open-minded? Because I once felt, I spoke with a friend about it like a few years ago. I feel like I kind of do whatever I want, really, what I believe in, but I don't pay much attention to what the society would say about me. And I was like thinking, maybe if all my friends and everyone would do the same thing like I would do, then I'd think twice, because they wouldn't keep me, like kind of hold me back. Do you think there is something to it? As a society, not as an individual.
Right. I do. I think so. Reminds me a bit of the United States and Europe. Europe could play around with all these funny ideas of demilitarization, destruction of weapons. Who knows? Because America was there looking after them, and America was checking the Russian superpower, and that's why Europe could play games. And the Charedim often argue this case. The Charedim say, you know what?
Like with religious Zionism.
Yes, with the rest of Israel. Charedim say, okay, we get it that you guys have issues with us, with the Charedim, because we don't serve in the army, because we don't contribute to the economy and so on. But without us, Israel would look really different. Like
it's probably true.
We are kind of the gatekeepers of Israel's Judaism, at least on an observant level.
Do you think
from a firm perspective. And I think there's some truth in that.
But the influence that religious Zionism have on Judaism in Israel is way bigger, on Chilonim, on secular people, because they have much more encounter with them.
You know what? It's interesting to think about that. I don't think it's a clear-cut case. On the one hand, there's more interaction, of course, between religious Zionists and between non-religious Jews in Israel. On the other hand, I'm not sure how impactful that encounter is, because the religious scientists are coming in and say, this is our space,
Yeah.
while the Charedim are offering a different space. And the tshuva movement, the 70s and 80s and 90s, the happy years of the big tshuva movement,
Rabbi.
Uri Zohar and all the others, Papa Karnon, and all the the famous Balei Tshuva that swept many tens of thousands with them, that became Balei Tshuva. They all chose to become Balei Tshuva to the Haredi version. Today not. Today less, and it's much more nuanced today. But for those decades, they didn't go to the religious Zionists because they said, hey, these guys are like us. They went to the Haredi space because they wanted something authentic, something demanding, something
different
for them,
from what they had
yes,
before.
something that represented like a Judaism with a sacrifice, something real, something. And so I would say, that the Charedim certainly, in the Haredi eyes, they're like the mezuzah of the state of Israel. And maybe that's an exaggeration, but there's something to that. And they're upholders of the faith in a certain sense. And for us too, it's a good question.
Yeah, you think within the Haredi society it also exists?
It's a good question, because
it's not so fair, because I still wouldn't agree with the people that are very rigid and close-minded, and I'd be like, hey, that's not the way. And yet I kind of benefit from the way they are, because they do keep some Yitzivut, maybe? How do you say?
Stability.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't. You know what I would say? I would say that society benefits from diversity. The fact that you have a diverse range of people, each of them pulling in a certain direction, that benefits society. But that benefit breaks down when the groups, the relevant groups, they don't talk to each other. They don't respect each other. They don't interact with each other. And I think that some of the types that you're speaking about, the very close-minded, the very extremists, when they say, like, it's either our way or no way, meaning our way is the only way, and then anything that goes outside of the boundaries that we set, even an iota, is disqualified already. I don't know. I don't think.
You don't think there's a benefit there?
I'm not sure, because it's too.
It's hard to agree with them.
It's not just about agreeing, though. Your question is, do I rely on them to maintain the stability of the Jewish space? No, I don't think that gives stability,
I heard from
because
someone,
the rigidity is so extreme that it doesn't.
It doesn't survive.
It doesn't give stability.
If you're too
it can't be
extreme,
stable.
really,
In fact, those groups keep splintering.
I
They
believe
always
that.
splinter.
I believe that every group, if it's too rigid and extreme, then it can't survive reality eventually, because things change so much, and you can keep it for like 100 years, but
Right, so it can survive by becoming ever more extreme, and that's why they keep splintering.
forever.
I don't know forever, but they keep splintering, right? All
I
the
heard
extremist
from
groups-
someone once that he wanted to donate money, and he chose to donate to Toldot Aaron. It's like the most,
one of the most extreme groups, right?
yeah, if not the most. And he said, like, look, in a few hundred years, this is what's gonna be left from the religious people. And I was like, what? How can you say that?
But only the most extreme will survive?
Yeah, because, everyone you get like mixed up with secularism.
I don't know. History hasn't shown.
I
History does not
It just,
prove that point.
first of all, it's just, how can you not trust? It's really not trusting the next generation. These are going to be good people and they're going to make good decisions. Okay, they're going to be fine. Second of all, how can you donate your money to people that you really disagree with? Like, how can you do this? These are not your values.
Right. I'll tell you what I would say, though. And this I would say with great confidence, that, even though I think that living a life which allows you, fulfillment outside of, let's say, the base medrash, going to work, doing things outside, engaging with a secular space can be a very fulfilled life and a very meaningful life and a deeply religious life and so on and so on. I can definitely say that we want to encourage and we want to make sure that we have a religious elite that are not in that space. A religious elite that really all they do is they study Torah, they become the rabbinic elite. They're the ones that are going to be, the Rosh Yeshiva, the teachers of Torah. And they don't have to be extremists to do that. And you don't have to be an extremist to believe that we need those people. And those people, they do give us that benefit. That yes, we're in a more complicated or nuanced or complex space
but
with
they have
challenges,
to be part of reality.
But they speak to us. Their windows are large enough to see us, while a lot of the kind of extremists that you're speaking about, their windows are only small enough to allow in the light, but they don't see anything outside. They don't care about anything on the outside. And those guys, I wouldn't put them into that equation.
You wouldn't donate your money.
I wouldn't be giving them my maestras. No.
Yeah. Okay, so that went faster than I thought. It was fascinating, super interesting. Hope the viewers and listeners also found it interesting and enjoyed it. And thank you, Abba.
Thank you, Shira. Always a pleasure to speak. I learn a lot from these conversations. I have to say,
it's fun.
We don't have them every day at home, so it's a lot of fun and very interesting.
Yeah, we're nerds at home, but not that, not that much. Yeah. So thank you, and thank you for listening to the Rabbi's Daughter podcast.
Till next time.